Hi everyone. So you must all wonder why such a title. So gender specificity in informal transport. How come gender specificity, women mobility has to do with informal transport? And especially I look at the global south. So it's something we will go through over the presentation. I'm Pauline. I'm a PhD student trying to understand how digitalization transformed the day-to-day life of women, more especially in India and as well in Congo, Kinshasa and Pune. And I'm also supporting the business development team in Trufi in the association, where we try to map informal transport and create mass applications for the global south. And in fact, gender specificities in mobility, and more specifically, in informal transport, is a very vast topic. And the first thing I would like to show you is how gender mobility is actually specific and how it's different from male mobility. So the first thing is very often all around the world, we observe that female mobility actually depend a lot compared to men on domestic responsibilities, especially because we can see that very often women are in charge of for example, a child or also elder people. Also, they might have to do shopping or go to the pharmacy or do more things related to the domestic life and responsibilities. So, um, also, you can see on the graph on the left. So it's a pretty interesting one where we can see that indeed, in most cases, we could see in research that could see that male have much more direct commuting way, while women has to go to different have different steps along her way from work from work to home. She actually has to do, as I said, different tasks, which bring her in different places, and often she has much more smaller trajectories compared to men, but much more frequent. Yeah, shorter trips and more frequent. Also, women often have less financial strength, so she doesn't have the priority on owning a car. So when a household own a car, one car, for example, usually is the male who has the priority. So it makes that women are very often depending on public transport. So if the public transport is insufficient or pretty inadapted, then they actually are the one suffering from those uncertainties and problems. And what we can observe as well is when the women are wealthier, then they try to seek for more autonomy and safe and security. So then they choose more like to travel through taxis or with their own vehicle when they have the opportunity. In the mobility of women also, we observe many limitations. So I made a list of them, but actually there are much more. And one of them is indeed the tradition, which can discourage mobility and create more immobility, where the women have to, the photo is a bit too much, but where it's often said that the women's world is inside the house, while the male area of activities is more outside, which make that often in many traditions, women stay inside and in her domestic area without really moving outside. So that's one thing. And also it's much more common, I can observe it as well in my studies, that women move much less at night. And in many cultures, not always accepted. Another limitation is insecurity and fear. There is big differences between a real, actual insecurity and the fear of being in an insecure area, or at least feeling danger, because it can be that actually it's just a feeling and not really real. So there are lots of mental constructions which cause that. And anyway, those insecurities that I could think of that can limit the mobility of women are sexual harassment, kidnapping, robbery, etc. I think it's what is also interesting is indeed we are also observing in some studies that there are insecurities, those insecurities at the end. So there is, how say, I express myself badly, but men suffer much more at the end from violence in the street than women. Maybe because women tend to go out less, and they are more, when they're attacked, it's more focused on sexual harassment. So it's actually interesting to see statistics, also to see that in the statistics very often the violence is actually in the street, but actually at home. So it also questions those ideas of street insecurities, but still it does have a huge effect on mobility of women, especially again at night, and the fear that it causes actually decreasing the capacity of moving. Another limitation is, of course, as we say before, the women move a lot through public transport, and if those public transport are not reliable, inadapted, or insufficient, it actually limits the mobility of women. And actually, it has it can go from, the transport can go from formal to informal, but we can also more talk about artisanal transport, especially in the global south, which often cover the public transport, which is insufficient due to the dismissing states, which can be. So it's something which is indeed much more happening in the global south. But still, it's interesting also to see that, for example, in many cities, when especially you have to make a long travel, you have to take different modes, and there is no integration of the modes. So then you have to pay several times those transport. So you paid for 3 buses along your way, which at the end make the travel very expensive. And that's something which can also obviously limit due to bad or insufficient planning. And obviously there are more and more people, at least something I drastically observe in Kinshasa in Congo, where the city is growing so fast and there are so much standing traffic jam, which indeed stop the traffic, the possibility of moving, but the worst is that indeed it also blocks public transport. So it can create isolation, and where you cannot reach, or you have hard time to reach places. For example, in Kinshasa, you have a river in the middle of the city. You have a river with 2 bridges, and on the other sides of the river, there are more than millions of people living there. And in order to go in the city center, they have to cross those 2 bridges. So it's about millions of people every day trying to cross these bridges, which create obviously terrible traffic jams. And today there is it's a digital era, and we can observe the multiplication of applications, solving challenges, and also creating other ones all over the world. So you have those digital ticketing, also micro mobilities, and even in terms of safety, there is a huge multiplication of safety apps. I observed this especially in India and in America. And all those services are great in a way that they actually create information and also create more and more data, and all those data enable to create even more services and applications. But at the same time, so it's beneficial in some way, but at the same time, it also creates, so it can also create a a kind of, or at least something I observe in the mobility of women, a kind of surveillance where we will ask a lady or your wife to actually share her trip all the time she take a Uber, because you need to know where she is in case there is some safety. And this is great in terms of safety, but it can be abused. And that's something to look at, even if indeed digitalization has this power of helping planning the day, which help ladies obviously to manage to do all their domestic tasks and working tasks and yeah, just helping them planning the day. But it can also, how to say, something else I observe is that those apps can help or at least support mobility, but at the same time, it creates or at least encourage some immobility with some other apps, for example, food delivery apps or in delivery apps in general. It's something I can see in the case of India, where in Pune, you can see here the name of the city. In Pune, there are so many delivery apps that people actually don't need to go out anymore. They can get everything from home, which creates this immobility and might have consequences in the feeling of going out, of in your mobility capacity of going out and of traveling safely, feeling safe. It can be something which impacts your confidence. So overall, what I would like to say in this presentation is indeed the inclusivity is something to really think of when we think of digital, because in many cases, apps are not thought, they are thought for customers, but not for always everyone. And indeed, not everyone has a smartphone. And for example, in the case of Kinshasa in Congo, it's very common to lose your smartphone because you're walking the street and someone steals it. So for a few days, you don't have a smartphone, or maybe you don't buy again a smartphone. So I mean, if you're used to those services, it's something which can impact your feelings and habits. But the other way around, there are more and more people today which who get access to smartphone, and the technology need to be thought out in an inclusive manner and answer specific problems, supporting with the support of governments. So in ensuring mobility, so that would be one really important way to lead digital in mobility. And also something is, at the end of the day, mobility is a right for all citizens, even more than digitalization, which is indeed a tool. So thank you. I hope it was more or less clear.